Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. Hopefully you're getting settled, getting into this virtual room. And thank you for coming. Thank you for spending this next hour with Scrum.org. And maybe you're on the live stream. I'm not totally sure what that means, but and you're participating from that. So portfolio management, hot topic, hey, with APOM, Agile Product Operating Model. And hopefully you're going to enjoy this. Okay, so maybe this is your first experience with Scrum.org and you don't know who we are. I think for the majority of you, you know who we are, but organization founded by Ken Schwaber. Actually, I was just accidentally talking to him a minute ago. We have a meeting, a regular meeting that I moved today because of this webinar, and he'd forgotten that we moved it. So we had a quick conversation. He goes, wow, that sounds like an interesting topic. Maybe I'll attend. And we briefly talked about portfolio management. I'll share some of his very brief insights later. But he founded Scrum.org. Our mission is to help people and teams solve complex problems. How do you build organizations? How do you build environments where people really are allowed, enabled, supported in their pursuit of solving complex problems? And we do it training, certification, and ongoing learning, which obviously today's all about. I'm Dave West, CEO here at Scrum.org. Apologies for the accent, though I have lived in America now 25 years, 25 years, something like that. I still sound ridiculously English. Apologies for that. Or as my grandmother used to say, mid-Atlantic. I'm the CEO here at Scrum.org, been CEO of Scrum.org coming on for my 10th year. And there's all my contact details. I kind of love this stuff. My passion in life is to help teams deliver value. And because the environments that I certainly worked in when I was working in large organizations didn't really necessarily help people deliver value. So I reach out, let's have a chat. You know, if you don't get your questions answered today, feel free to just ping me on LinkedIn or X, I guess, or you know, obviously an email as well. And that picture is a little out of date now. I don't look quite as young as that. That was from my Forester days. All right, before we talk about portfolio management, I just want to set the scene. I want to set the context, as it were. So we've been talking a lot about Agile Product Operating Model and evidence-based approach at Scrum.org. There's been a number of webinars on the topic, more and more content's coming out. So my motivation for creating this content or for structuring our content around these ideas is really to provide a narrative around how organizations move from project to product, give them an end state in mind, and maybe some mechanisms for that journey. Yes, it is a combination of professional Scrum, Nexus, EBM, and modern product management. But that synergy, that grouping of those ideas, is really based on the idea or the concept that products are the primary way in which we align, particularly in the digital part of your enterprise, we align value to stakeholders and to users, etc. And the assertion is, and this is something that is very challenging, and something that most organizations are like, no, what this can't make sense. That each product itself could have its own operating model, meaning that the way in which the teams are organized, the processes that they follow, the governance practices that they have to work within, the way in which things are funded, or the way in which risk is managed, could be, and maybe sometimes should be, unique to that product and its state and its needs at that moment. We also believe that when you're doing product, you need to be agile. And when we mean agile, what we're talking about is short feedback loops or learning loops, empowering teams to make decisions, pushing the decision making, obviously within clear business guidelines and goals, whether they're OKRs or some other series of goals, but empowering teams to make decisions, ensuring that information is transparent, allowing empiricism to thrive, and then continuous improvement in terms of the operating model, how we work, and in terms of the product or the capabilities that we're delivering to our customers. And, you know, when we talk about APOM, we often talk about, you know, how we organize, how we measure and incentivize, what processes make sense, how we govern, you know, and what sort of culture needs to be in place in the context of a product that has a definition around business, technology, operations, compliance, and obviously total cost of value. And we do that in an evidence-based approach. So that sort of sets the scene for when we're talking about portfolio management, because there's a lot of things that happen at the portfolio level that undermine our ability to be agile and our ability really to empower teams and our ability to deliver value. So let's start talking a little bit about that. So when I decided that we needed to talk about this and put together a webinar, I talked to a bunch of organizations, and I talked to some, you know, ex-CIOs and people that are working in large organizations that are doing portfolio management. And we talked a lot about how does it work in your organization. So this presentation is very much based on the learning from that. I haven't worked in every organization, and every situation is going to be different. But the one takeaway that I realized is there's a level of complexity that has crept in to many of the stories that they told me that was very concerning. And what I'd love to do is not necessarily make it massively less complex. I'm not sure I'm capable of doing that, but at least for us to be cognizant of that complexity in some way, because we have some challenges, and these are just some of them that I wrote down from the conversations. There was an interesting story from a large consumer packaged goods organization where they were telling me that they've got these very different planning cycles. The business has a planning cycle. The finance has a different planning cycle, which sound a bit odd because of and actually, interestingly, each geography finance has a different planning cycle because of tax cycles, etc. You know, the HR has a different planning cycle. There was all these different cycles, and ultimately, the place that it really caused problems was in the delivery of digital capabilities, because many of those other cycles, not only were they providing investment for the digital teams, but they were actually providing requirements to those teams, particularly in the finance cycles, etc. And that caused all sorts of complexity, you know. And when I said why, they were like, well, because different people own them. I was like, oh, well, wouldn't it be better if we brought everything together? And they were like, well, that means you'd have to get all these different parts of the organization together. The other thing that was very clear from the conversations was it was, you know, definitely planning for me is about, now maybe I'm a little too Scrum here, and I apologize, but it's about defining product goals and creating items, you know, providing some understanding of the things that are going to be on the backlog, right? Defining work that's going to be done. But that isn't really. It's about capital, CapEx, OpEx. It's about all these other things. It's about how many people are going to work in this group. What about vendors and partners, and how much are we going to be giving them, and contracts? And it's sort of like the tip of all of this other stuff, which is incredibly complicated. The other thing was very clear, and this was a conversation with a financial services company, that the business want complete certainty for the year ahead, even though if you ask them, do you know what interest rates are going to be in 3 months? They're like, well, of course we don't. There's some level of uncertainty. Well, yes, but that's different. We need to know, particularly IT and technology, what your spend is exactly to the number and where it's going and what the goals are, so we can measure against that. And we want that done every year or every 3 years. There was somebody I spoke to, there's a 3-year one. Can you believe that? Up front. And we're like, ooh, okay. And I can see the why. I mean, obviously stability is important. You want to know what you're spending. You want to have an outlook and a forecast. I'm not going to go through each of these. I think many of them, are obvious in your organizations. Messy, complex, uh, relationships between organization, application systems and outcomes, who owns what, where does things fit, always very messy. And every single person that I spoke to, it seemed that risk was more important than value. And that maybe that's a takeaway, and maybe that's a little unfair, but that's definitely what I felt. And then the last thing is, I think something that is very clear in most organizations is business and technology are very much being managed separately, even when the organization is predominantly digital enterprise. So it's a bit painful, isn't it? So products could potentially be a mechanism that we use to make it all a little bit simpler. So I have a reasonable amount of experience working in product organizations. TaskTop, I was the chief product officer, much smaller than many of the organizations you worked in. But where we decided to invest, between Sync and Viz and Dev and some other products that we had, and we're a very small company, so not that many. We also had some infrastructure products around CRM and other things. That I was accidentally responsible for. It was a relatively simple process, and to some extent because of the amount of people, but it was based on a model that Silicon Valley has been using, for a long time. Benchmarking is a phrase that is used. I'm not totally sure, but and it really is the maturity and the value of the situation, the product determines the investment, and ultimately it's relatively simple. You sit down in a meeting room, virtual or in person, and you look at all the products. You determine where they are in terms of their maturity. Are they in an early model, meaning early, sort of in there? So there's a large amount of unknown and there's a speculation around value. Are they scaling? Are they, meaning they're growing, adding internationalization, localization, adding more business, supporting more business processes, etc. Have they gone through that process and they're in a more stable thing, or are we sunsetting them? And you overlay risk and value, which is ultimately, the speculative nature of value, and it determines very simply value versus investment, right? And how much are you willing to spend? You get basically a benchmark or formulaic approach to determining what percentage of revenue you should be spending, or value you should be spending on that product. And obviously you then can use that as a baseline and determine whether you should spend more, whether you should spend less. And that gives you a very simple strategic investment portfolio for your products. It's pretty simple. I mean, it really is. It's as simple as that. Obviously, this, as you start scaling it, there might be some challenges, and we'll talk about that. And then you allow the product teams to determine what actual work they're doing. So a key concept is fund the product for the teams, not the work. That's a fundamental thing that we certainly we did. Now, what it tended to, there was a certain investment or investment model that we were constrained at TaskTop, which was really interesting. But ultimately, that's what we did. And then what that provides us with, or provided my product managers and dev teams and actually everybody, product marketing and everybody, we had clear guide rails for the product teams. In our organization, that was very small teams, but yes, we had guardrails. And understanding the strategic value and investment choices, it was very clear, it was very transparent. We know that this product is, at this stage, we're investing this, it has this potential value. That gives us a true north. And then those two values, how much we're spending on the product, are we delivering against this value, these OKRs that ultimately are driving the value that the product team works on with the business, or with the market, etc. Is that, and we quarterly at the quarterly business reviews reviewed against these two things. Are we, particularly if we've increased our investment in a product and brought more people in, working with a third party, maybe with outsourcing, how are we on track to that, and how much, are we delivering the value against it? But we never, ever at that portfolio level talked about work. I mean, not never, ever. Obviously, when we talked about value, we talked about themes, we talked about changes, but ultimately it was all couched in the outcome that we were seeking. The product, the teams decided on what to do. And that worked brilliantly. But what it did is what it didn't do, and what it doesn't do, is necessarily ensure that everybody is working on a broader strategy where the products have some level of connection to them. So we're going to talk about that in a moment. The other thing is, what it really highlighted was when, and this is certainly true at a micro level in my experiences, when the investments were out of sync with the value provided because the maintenance of the product. So we said, well, it's at this stage, we had a product called TaskTop Dev, which was a developer experience. And we also supported Mylin in the open source community. And there was times where we needed to invest more than the value really allowed us to, because of situations, because of that. So even though we had this very clear set of constraints, at the quarterly business review, the executive leadership would actually say, when the team said, look, this is the reality. We have to do this internationalization, this security, this thing. We have to move to a different app server. Remember those days? And this is the reality, but this is not, we can't do that and still deliver this value. Our current value is gonna be a problem. So it really does provide us with a very simple, very transparent way of looking at values and investments. So ultimately, if that's the portfolio, we're managing a portfolio like a VC manages its portfolio in some ways. I'm not a VC. I wouldn't know where to begin, but it seems from my experience of working with VCs, which I have a lot of, that it's basically how they manage their portfolio. Investment value, simple as that. Looking at that, quarterly reviews against that, see if they're on track for that. Are they going to hit the next round of funding? Are they, looking at that process? They don't give all their money up front, and that is another mechanism that I've seen and talked to organizations about, this idea that all the funding doesn't happen up front, it happens in stages based on basically the value being delivered along the way. That's another perspective, and definitely very VC oriented. By funding teams rather than work, or funding products rather than work, it allows the people closer to the work to actually determine what that work is, and its flexibility is brought in, because at least on a quarterly basis, so you get flexibility at the team level, making decisions about the work that needs to be done based on the needs that the team is seeing in the marketplace. And then you get flexibility at the organization portfolio level, at least on a quarterly basis, because you're reviewing against these very simple metrics around value and around cost, which is pretty straightforward. So, and evidence can play a really great part of that. It can contextualize that value. So if you're not familiar with EBM, the sort of like unknown value and known value, these things, being able to look at these KVAs and actually use those as a mechanism. Also, the investment around capabilities of delivering more frequently, so infrastructure type investments, and how much value we're delivering every sprint or every release. It can help contextualize that. So do we need portfolio planning in an nth degree? No, simple portfolio planning, more like managing your portfolio like a VC. So but what about, so then, okay, so from a software company perspective, particularly a medium to small software company, it's relatively simple. Now, don't get me wrong, making the decisions and the choices and feeling like you've got to make those decisions makes it really quite hard. And that's the other thing that I found from my conversations with the organizations that aren't classical software companies, the banks, the consumer packaged goods companies, the insurance companies, and the like, the people I spoke to help me build this, is that the decisions aren't necessarily something people want to make, particularly when they have to say no to things. And that seems to be a theme as well. The other thing that I heard over and over again from talking to these organizations is that, well, that's great. If our products were completely separate and living completely separately, then easy peasy, right? No problem. But we have this strategic view of it. Also, some of our products are shared services, internal products. Some of our products are used by other products, particularly in the area of customer relationship management and the like. What? That doesn't work. Maybe we're entering a new market and multiple products have to come together. We're moving into Switzerland, which is a beautiful place this time of the year if you take your skis, right? So maybe that's the right thing to do. Government rules, GDPR is an example that I've personally experienced, which was not very pleasant. And then, of course, new cross-product initiatives. Maybe we're going to the cloud. I know that's like 10 years ago, Dave. I know, sorry. Or we're going to, or AI, or whatever it is. So cross-product initiatives are the reality for most organizations. So what happens then? How do we ensure, and this is what I observed, and maybe in your organizations you don't have this, is that this nice, very simple product approach, understanding the portfolio, doing benchmarking against that, understanding the value, understanding the risk, and then basically taking that $1,000 and allocating it to the products that your portfolio has, probably a bit more than 1,000, but you know what I mean, and then Bob's your uncle, right? Easy peasy. Then you try to move to a much broader thing where you've got these cross-product initiatives and we start doing horse trading, you start trying to understand, doing some level of analysis before you bring it to this group. I saw that this started to happen, that organizations suddenly went from a very nice way of organizing their teams and investing in those teams and teams of teams to support their customer to something a little bit more messy. And product thinking was replaced again by project thinking. Suddenly it became, okay, we've got this work, and it's being allocated to teams to work on. Empowered product teams became just functional teams that were being measured on work. Innovation was definitely removed because we're telling teams what to do, and value, which is the pivotal focus for a product portfolio approach, really was replaced by dependency management. I'm not saying the stuff on the right, on the the side is wrong. You still have to do dependency management. You still have to do risk management. Teams, I'm not so sure about. Project thinking, I'm not so sure about. Project practices can be valuable, but but ultimately, if you lose sight of being able to empower teams, being able to create a space that allows them to innovate and create the right solutions, keeping value front and center in your process, then I think you're going to be in trouble. So when organizations that are on the road to moving from project to product start thinking about, okay, so how much can we how much of our funding, our capacity should be decided by the product teams, and we decide how big those product teams are based on some sort of investment portfolio, compared to how much of it should be cross-product driven, top-down, very much an orchestrated process. From my experience and from my observations, and this number's probably far too low, really, but when 50% of your work or opportunity is cross-product, and managed in that way from a portfolio perspective, then there's probably something wrong with the way in which you've allocated those products, meaning what your product model looks like and how work comes into them. It is possible that without doing any of these cross-product initiatives, just by defining value appropriately and ensuring stakeholders are actively engaged with those products, that you don't need that oversight and that investment model. It is possible. The other thing that it might indicate when you've got all of these coordinated endeavors is that your products are too granular or too coarse, that there's the technology that underpins everything is going through a massive state of flux, and that's driving these cross-product initiatives. You're probably trying to do too much, and that's from what my one observation from quite brief conversations with quite a large group of people about this is trying to do too much. Saying no or not now has to, we teach that at portfolio, at product management, at Agile Product Management, at the PSPO and product ownership class, right? We focus them on, actually, you have one goal and you build a backlog based on that. And when people say, well, we want to do this as well, you say, great. Is that more important than the goal we're currently focused on? No, or yes. Well, then, you know, we actually say no. And many organizations say, we can't do that. Can we not? Or it's a choice. And maybe it means that we need to be shorter on focused on one goal and then moving on to the other. But trying to do too much seems to be the theme that I saw over and over again. And then obviously the market, etc. So a word of warning. If suddenly you're feeling that cross-product initiatives are massive and that's over 50% of your portfolio, planning processes are based on that outside the context of your products, then you're probably in a little bit of trouble and you might need to look at it. It's an opportunity for a process improvement. Anyway, so this is an approach that I've seen kind of work to manage those cross-product initiatives. So the products have already been funded. You've already gone through that benchmarking, that very simple approach. And now you move into, okay, so we have these 3 initiatives that are obviously cross-product in nature, and we want to fund them appropriately because they're important to our organization, they're strategic. Now, hopefully those initiatives are described in terms of OKRs, objectives, and key results or measures. We need to define the objective and the measure for them. They can't just be, we need to move to the cloud. They should be, I guess, we're moving to the cloud because we want to save CapEx, OpEx, so this amount, blah, 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 you know, something. And that was a very trite example, but you know what I mean. That then feeds into a cross-product or portfolio planning process where you've got these product teams who are now taking what their model, maybe the investment is increasing because of these cross-product initiatives. So you can see that product A suddenly is increasing because of the initiative over there, as is product B. Gosh, product C, which I forgot to paint red, sorry about that, massive amount. And it's, oh, well, interestingly, product C, they're not increasing the investment. We're just reducing the amount of product work that they can, product-driven work, and this initiative is taking over that. Now, hopefully the executives are in the room there who are the stakeholders that are banging on the product door saying, we need this, we need this, we need this. They have to understand that because of this cross-product initiative, GDPR, Y2K, remember that? Isn't it crazy that that was 25 years ago? Crazy. Anyway, you know, that we need to do that, which means you're going to have less ability to inform the backlog. And you can see D, product D, we're all right, mate. We don't have to worry about that. Oh, and by the way, there needs to be a new product because of this cross-product initiative that's coming out of this. There's some process that happens to this. Now, all of that has to happen in the context of skills, vendors, constraints, money, legacy, which implies that the people at this meeting and in this process need to be aware of all of that and it needs hopefully to be transparent so that people can make those decisions. But ultimately, what this means is that there is that for product A, B, and C, and this new product team E, that cross-product initiatives are going to affect them. And there's D sitting there going, we're fine, GDPR doesn't affect us for whatever reason. Maybe it's a US only product that's only used in the US, etc., etc. So sounds simple. Yeah. Now you can imagine if there was 20 of these cross-product initiatives, or 30 or 40 or 50, it starts getting very, very complicated. So it's important, though, that outcomes are fundamentally a part of the way in which these cross-product initiatives are described. To focus on value ensures that product initiatives are built around outcomes and measures. And that ensures or helps ensure that if you're focused on an outcome rather than telling them they've got to do this work, that the teams have some latitude in how they realize that outcome. It also means that for some of these cross-product initiatives, that discovery is going to have to happen at the initiative level. And this is something that I've seen as well, that a cross-product initiative comes across the desk of some CIO, and they're like, oh, Jesus, we need to do this. This is important, right? And they go, oh, okay. They create a little team, a Skunks Works team, adding to the workload of the people that are already working on stuff and they're already really busy. You know, if you look at your schedule, they're the bits that happen to clash with everything that you always see. And they go off and they do some discovery work on it. They do some estimation, they do some planning, they do some, is this valuable, is this not? They then take that and go, yeah, it's important. Then it becomes a cross-product initiative, which then feeds into the normal delivery process, which we saw above. Nah, discovery is, if you need to do that, hopefully the investment is relatively small and in the context, but it needs to be managed in the same way by the teams that are actually working on that. The other thing that's interesting is, and this is, initiatives need owners too. Products have a product owner. They're responsible for delivering the value for that product, right? We get that. It's pretty straightforward. Now you've got these cross-product initiatives that need to be owned as well, and they need a cadence and they need a process. Now, what's interesting about this is they don't have the power of a product owner, meaning they don't define the backlog. They can influence, they're a stakeholder to that product owner. And their job is to encourage those product teams based on that original planning model that we saw earlier. Cross-product initiatives will require cross-product meetings and work, test, and integration, which is an overhead. And so how do you minimize that so it doesn't become the teams? And this is what I saw, particularly at a consumer packaged goods company I was talking to. There's so many of these that people are continuously going for. I don't know when they have time to do work. I remember when IBM bought Rational, I was working in Lexington, Massachusetts, and I remember that it was fine for the first 6 months, 9 months, and then they took our soda and made us move on to Lotus Notes, which was, IBM's an amazing company and they were doing amazing things with our portfolio, but they took our soda, which was free soda, which was very important. But ignoring that, but slowly, initiative after initiative started creeping into our very straightforward product planning process that we had at Rational. And suddenly I was attending as a product owner, manager of Rational Unified Process, more and more meetings. And suddenly I was having less and less time to actually do my real job. I didn't even have time to talk to customers. It was a disaster. So you have to be very wary of this overhead. The other thing that I found, which was really, really interesting, is, and this was certainly true at IBM, who obviously, because of their sheer amazingness, have so many different things they could be doing. However, my boss set my targets. And he told me, it was actually Dean Leffingwell, which is sort of back in the day, Kurt Bittner, Dean Leffingwell, Kurt Bittner, and some others really interesting, awesome people. They set these targets, and and that was it. And I worked to those, their goals that they decided. Then these cross-product initiatives, though they were funded and I had resources, whatever that meant, because everybody was too busy anyway, because nobody said no, to do the work, guess what? They didn't align. So there was always a level of tension. So ensure that the product owners and the product objectives, the way in which they're incentivized, the way in which they are encouraged to align to their product outcomes, supporting their customers. The value word in that portfolio thing, make sure they align. So at the very least, it means that cross-product initiatives, you need to, as a product owner of those or an initiative owner of those, you need to couch the work that you're doing in things that make sense to the product teams. GDPR is a great example. You could say that current value is massively at risk because of this. And this is demonstrating not only the fines that hit the organization, but the contracts that are going to be got rid of, for instance. Okay, sorry. So I've described a process. You do general high-level benchmark course portfolio planning, and on the products based on value and investment, using a benchmark and looking at risk. That determines the size of your product teams or the investment in those product teams. You then look at your cross-product initiatives, have a separate planning exercise that takes those cross-product initiatives and then looks at what that impact that has on the products. We try to keep that to a small amount. We describe those initiatives in terms of the outcomes, and we allow discovery to happen in those teams. And then initiatives have owners, they have their own cadence, they raise particularly around those dependencies. It's managed in a very consistent way with how we manage products. And all goodness happens. We try to keep those to a minimum. We try to focus on delivering value to our stakeholders. Job's done. Sounds good. So what about Scaled Agile Framework? Now, I'm no expert here. We have members of our community that are SPTCs, and they are much more adept at this. If you want to find those, go and look at our website. However, from the conversations with the couple of organizations that are using SAFe, it didn't feel very agile. They have this funnel of big ideas, initiatives, or whatever. They review them, creating these epics, the hypothesis, etc. Some lean thinking there, like that. That seems to make a lot of sense. They have an epic owner. That's a bit like an initiative owner, how I've described it. And I'm not trying to create another methodology with portfolio planning. I'm just describing that you need to have, if you've got a cross-product initiative, it needs to be owned by somebody. It could actually be owned by, if it's predominantly in one product area, it could be owned by that product area. But anyway, so you get this, that sounds very similar. You then do this work where you do cost estimating, you define solutions, alternate solutions, you create lean business case, you do, hang on a minute, doesn't it sound a little bit waterfall? Now, I'm sure that's not the intent. I'm sure it really isn't. And maybe we solve all this by having a pool model at the end. But then if it's important, surely they have to do the work on it. So how do we incentivize and encourage and prioritize the work on all these different backlogs to do that? And then you have this LPM group, management group, in portfolio management organization that does the approvals. You sequence it, and then it goes into implementing. You have MVPs, though surely not everything's an MVP. Some discovery doesn't require the creation of an MVP, but maybe that's broader. And then obviously it then drives work into the teams, and those epics then get factored into the broader set of work, and then it's finished and done, right? Now, I'm no expert at this, and you need to look at it yourself, but be wary, I guess, is what I'm saying, is, if you bring in work to teams to do, it reduces their empowerment. It might not align with their own objectives. It might not, you already defined a solution up front, which might not be the right thing to do. From my experience, the simplest solutions really are clearly identifying problems as a series of objectives and results, things that we're measuring. I guess that's what a hypothesis is. And then bringing those to the teams, Sometimes that requires cross-funding initiatives to increase the amount of capacity in those teams and or change the priority of the work in those teams. Don't break your product teams, I guess is the message. Keep those product teams empowered, keep those product owners or managers, if we're using SAFe, responsible for that set of capabilities inside your organization, and then allow them to work within those constraints and those priorities defined by the stakeholders and the environment for those teams. So I guess it'd be quite easy to take this model and just become a bit of a project model. As I say, I'm no expert at this, and I think just challenge some of those natural ways that work is planned into and put into this model, and instead look at ensuring that the product teams are funded appropriately. So I've been talking probably far too much, and you're probably like, oh, he's been waffling on, hasn't he? And you're not totally wrong there, and I apologize. I'm just sort of quite interested in how, particularly in large organizations, work is planned in the, or outcomes are funded, which is perhaps a better way than saying work is planned. So maybe I've gone on a lot, but there's some principles that sort of make sense. I think the most important single fundamental principle is fund the teams, fund the products. I should write that as products, not the work. And I think that is a crucial construct. Now, obviously, when you're going through that benchmarking, when you're looking at the stage the product is in its life cycle, when you're looking at the risks, I'm not saying you can't talk about the ideas and the concepts that are driving that the value in those products. Of course not. But ultimately, a product delivers value to your organization. Understand that and invest in it in that context. Then they can then cut the suit to suit the cloth, as it were, and work to do the work that makes the most sense. Minimize cross-product initiatives that require portfolio management. That doesn't mean that when you're talking to a stakeholder, that stakeholder is considering this product in the context of another product and another product, and they're thinking, but it's at a very much at a closer to the work kind of level. Discovery and validation happens within the teams and beyond, meaning they also engage support and get help to do things, maybe surveys, maybe data analysis or whatever. But ultimately, that it happens within those teams. Having it separately and then, oh, we're going to fund this now because somebody else has decided it's going to work, and then it's pushed to the team, is a recipe for disaster on so many levels. One very simple level is that people, if you're told what to do, then you're going to find reasons why you can't do it. Whereas if you're given this objective and encouraged to find solutions for it, you're more likely to want to find those solutions. Both initiatives and product work should be defined in terms of outcomes and measures. Yes. So we teach that on our PSPO class, that ultimately good backlogs don't describe work. Product backlogs. They describe goals and then ideas to how we're going to realize that goal that are measurable outcomes. Ensure your incentives in particular, but also your structure and your governance align to this strategy that you're talking. And you're going to see the friction points. And it's likely that it's going to encourage you to think about your incentive model, how your teams are organized, and how risk is governed. It's going to ask you questions on that. Transparency, cadence, and clear ownership is required. Ownership in particular is something that became very questionable in some of the organizations I talked to. They have this portfolio planning process, and it's, finance there, the CIO's there, lots of people, lots of senior people, but they make the decisions and then it's pushed to people to do the work. That really doesn't work. If you're going to have a portfolio planning process, make sure the people are represented that do the work, and ensure that that's very clear who owns what, why, how. Having that governance process clearly documented is important. And then what about dependencies? Portfolio management isn't the place you manage dependencies. You manage dependencies on a minute by minute basis when you understand them. And it's up to the teams. If there is a dependency between two products and or between two teams inside a product, then it's important that those teams use the tools necessary to make those transparent, make them transparent and manage them accordingly. Dependency management is the responsibility of the teams that are working, and it can be very painful. And that's the reason why you have quarterly business reviews. That's the reason why you raise these things on a regular cadence as well. So, well, that was a bit of a roller coaster, wasn't it? We talked a little bit about product portfolio management, meaning investment. We then moved into cross-product initiatives and how you can manage those at the strategic level. We then talked about ultimately how complexity can suddenly start undermining all of this, and perhaps that feeling that I got when I was talking to these organizations that they're trying to do too much. Since saying no perhaps is the most important word that we can use when doing this, and that by simplifying processes and making them more transparent, it empowers people to be able to say not yet. It doesn't necessarily say no, but not yet. Or you can, as my grandmother would always said, you can only get so much sugar in a bag. And that is very true. Doesn't matter how many meetings you have, and doesn't matter how many times you pour the subtle out and move it around, if the bag's that size and you've got all this sugar, you're going to have some on the floor. Not totally sure what she meant by it, but that's my grand's sayings for you. But I think what she meant was, just by having things at this portfolio level, by agreeing all these cross-product initiatives, teams have only a certain amount of capacity, and there's only so much they can do. If teams are not delivering valuable stuff frequently, or the disconnect between strategy and execution, then maybe your products are badly defined, your incentives are out of sync, or you're trying to do too much. And I think that is really what I learned. The other thing that I learned as well along the way, which I didn't put in a slide, was finance and their role in this. From the way in which finance was described by the executives that I spoke to in these organizations, finance sounded a bit like the Spanish Inquisition. It sounded like that a lot of the things that they did was because of finance. I spoke to somebody in finance. Now, they're very open to these ideas, so maybe they're not representative. But what I found was that if you include them in this process, make them aware of the challenges that you have, that they are very, very, very open to changing how investments are made, how we report against those, and how we manage work inside your organization. Yes, they have some constraints, particularly around CapEx and OpEx. And some of those things can be very, very challenging. And maybe, ultimately we need to move to an OpEx type model completely, and this removing that capital investment idea. Maybe, I don't know, I'm no expert at that, but bring them in to the solution. Don't leave them sitting there on the side providing constraints. Make them part of the solution. Okay, we're going to move to some questions, but before we do that, there's some assets worth reading. Have a look at, have a little bit of a butcher's. There's a really interesting thing written there by actually an SPTC, Yuval, on basically how you can use portfolio planning from some experiences he's had on the journey and use it to actually drive better agile and product thinking at the team level. Perish the thought, hey? There's some really interesting thing written by a gentleman called Kurt Bittner on EBM and how evidence-based management can really improve your portfolio management of an investment products. And then there's been some interesting things on how lean portfolio management, LPM, fits into professional Scrum and the like, which I watched. Very interesting. So that's what I wanted. We've got about 9 minutes for some questions. I'm sure there's a bunch of them. I'm going to stop sharing because it's off-putting probably, and draw Lindsay into this conversation. She's been sitting patiently, and maybe some of you have been talking to her on the chat. Lindsay, have we got any questions? I've
We
not been looking at
have
the chat at all.
we have a lot of questions. Thank you so
Oh,
much for that, Dave. That was great. Seems like the audience was really engaged with lots of questions here. So I'm going to try to group a few together with similar themes. So there were several questions related to why we should fund teams and not the work. Someone just asked you to elaborate on that a little bit and provide an example. And then there were a few questions about like when we talk about funding the team and not the work. Unfortunately, most business owners focus on business deliverables and work first. Team always comes secondary. Like maybe some advice on how to overcome that.
okay. Yeah, let's
Yeah.
start with that. That is a challenge. I 100% agree. The, the motivation, the reason why software companies historically fund teams is because of the way in which historically they've been funded, right? You don't, you basically, you go to the VCs, right, or the investors, and you say, you don't give them a big list of all the things you need to do in a spreadsheet and say we need $5 million. You say, this is the market opportunity. And then you say, this is this sort of level of opportunity. And because of that, we think it's worth this amount, our organization. And because of that, we think, and it's a classic kind of conversation. And then you get this amount of money. And then that then trickles down into, okay, so this big value, let's look at the products that contribute to that and their contribution to that. And then that is allocated in that. And it is a relatively simple way of thinking about how you fund organizations. The biggest realization though that I have is that it might potentially highlight the fact that you're investing badly because of history. So imagine a part of your organization, part of your financial services company, and you have an annuity business, right? And that annuity business is steadily decreasing over time as in terms of value. However, because of the history of the annuity business, you've got there's a geezer that runs it. He's got I imagine it's a he, but he or she has got this 500 people working for them, and it's et cetera, et cetera. Now but the annuity business, the reason it's positioned as such, it drives all the other business. Now the other businesses have a lot more opportunity. They're growing. Maybe it's managed accounts, maybe it's crypto, whatever. They've got a lot more opportunity, and we need to grow them accordingly. And our investment isn't. It can be very challenging to tell that person not to invest in that, right? That they're no longer as important as they once were. But that is the reality. Products come, products go. And you have to be very cognizant. You can still make those choices, but you need to be cognizant of the value to investment ratio. And products gives us, for the first time, a very clear way to manage those investments. Because that's what we're doing. We're investing. Product is basically a collection of capabilities, digital products in particular, but probably all products, but digital products are a set of capabilities that provide a service in some way. And those capabilities have to be valuable, and that value for internal products can be quite challenging. But there's some very interesting conversations like, well, if we stop doing it, what would happen? If we bought an off-the-shelf product, what would happen? Those kind of conversations for internal products could be very interesting. And once you understand that value, then it's possible to determine the investment. But I'm not undervaluing the undermining. No, that's not the right word. I'm not underplaying. That's the phrase. The effort it requires to change executives to start thinking in terms of products as how they invest. So words of wisdom to get you there. I'm not sure I've got any other than try it. Just spend a couple of hours, think about your portfolio, think about the value, think about the cost, and with your executives, and see if that provides, at the very least, a different way of thinking about it. The thing that I also have seen, and maybe you see this as well, is that most work tends to be who shouts loudest rather than what's the most valuable. And if we can, at the very least, start describing our cross-product initiatives and even the work inside our products in terms of outcomes and results, and how it connects to the strategy, etc., then at least that then contextualizes the work in a way that at least allows us to move a little bit closer to the model that I described. I don't know. I sort of waffled on a bit there. Hopefully that answers your question. Very tricky. And then how do you do it? That was another question is, what does it look like? Well, what it looks like is look at how valuable your product is, use some sort of benchmarking model to determine what kind of percentage of value you should be investing. They're well known. They're in, the Valley's been using them for years. VCs have been using them for years, and then apply that accordingly. It could be as simple as that.
Great, Dave. Thank you. All right. So we have time for maybe one question that comes from a few questions. Again, I'm trying to group these together. Don't fret if we don't get to your question. We will figure out a way to get those addressed, whether it's on a podcast or in a blog or something. We will get these questions to Dave. They will get answered in some way, shape, or form. So there were a few questions just about value, Dave. How did you compare business value between completely different products was a question, and how do you get a consistent definition of value? There were a few like value definition types of questions in here.
So that is really, really hard, and every organization has to think about it slightly differently. Obviously, we had to do that right in our societies. I'm no economist. In fact, even though I did computer science and economics as an undergraduate, the economics sessions were so boring. I was like, it was impossible. So I'm not sure I'm an economist for sure. Though I did manage to pass that small major. But why is a loaf of bread? Compare a loaf of bread to an apple. Well, we have mechanisms to do that. You go to a supermarket, you see a comparison, right? And by the way, I don't know how much a loaf of bread is. What is it, $5 or something? And an apple, no idea either. But we have to build some sort of currency to allow us to make those decisions. And money tends to be the easiest, or financial value tends to be the easiest way of doing that. Which means that that things like, well, what would be the financial cost if we didn't have this service, if it's an internal service? If we moved it, what is the value, part of the value thing? So CRM is a great example. We spend millions of dollars on customer relationship management software. Even at Scrum.org, we've done that with Salesforce, an awesome product. But what's interesting is like, okay, so why did we spend that? It's more expensive than other products, Salesforce. We made a decision. So I asked my COO to put together a business case that looked at it in finance terms. I think at the end of the day, it has to come back to money in some way, shape, or form, unfortunately. Of course, you can invent other mechanisms to express value in an organization. And I'm sure that some creative people in this audience have. But I find that money, so time, new money coming into the business, those sort of things are the best way of working out those things. That's what I do. It's a really interesting I think value is, and there's stuff on our website about this, but it's definitely something that's the hardest part of product portfolio planning, defining the value of each product in a way that compares. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Dave, and thank you, everybody. Like I said, we will figure out a way to get these questions answered. We hope everybody got a lot of value out of this conversation.
Measurable in dollars and cents, or pounds and euros or whatever. Thanks, everybody.
Exactly. Thanks, everyone. Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.